Nice to see everyone. Welcome to our 10 a.m. Tanakh class. And this morning we're going to be looking at the portion of Mishpatim. Do you mind closing the door?
Yeah.
Thanks. And this is really where the Torah shifts gears, right? Up until now, we've had a lot of narrative. We've had the whole book of Genesis, which is all narrative. We had the beginning of Exodus, which is narrative of the Exodus and of the plagues and of the enslavement. And here it's when the Torah begins to shift gears a little bit and starts to bring a lot of laws. And Mishpatim itself means laws. This is right after the Ten Commandments. So last week, the mountain shook and the lightning and thunder were heard. The smoke came out of the mountain. They received the Ten Commandments. And we've been talking about kind of as a thread throughout all these last weeks, the relationship between God and the Jewish people. And so we started with when God revealed herself as a deliverer to the Jewish people, and then the plagues and how that manifested at the sea, and then how that manifested eventually at Mount Sinai when God said, "Will you be my treasured people?" And what does that mean? And will you be a nation of priests? And how does all of that work in the context of that relationship? So this week we're actually going to skip through all the laws because the laws are there. There's some interest, but really, in my mind, the most interesting part of the Parsha is the end of the Parsha after all the laws are given. And we will be looking at the laws over the next weeks and months, but there's a lot of laws to come. So before we delve deeply into the laws, we're going to look at some of the narrative at the end of the Parsha, which is really interesting, and which is in essence like a second revelation. The biblical scholars will tell us these are two competing narratives of the revelation of Mount Sinai, belonging to two different sources. Our traditional commentators try and meld it all together and give us a wonky timeline. So we'll see as we get to it. But really, it's one of the most interesting moments in my mind in the whole Torah, and has often forgotten. All right, so we're going to go to chapter 24 of Exodus.
$477.
476.
Oh, sorry. Bottom of 476 in the 8th tie-in.
This comes at the end of the Parsha after many of the laws have been revealed. Laws of idolatry, laws of kashrut, laws of criminal laws referring to when there's damages, sacrificial laws, agricultural laws, kind of like a summary of all the Torah. So let's begin, page 476.
And then he said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and bow low from afar. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but the others shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him." Moses went and repeated to the people all the commands of the Lord and all the rules. And all the people answered with one voice, saying, "All the things that the Lord has commanded, we will do." Moses then wrote down all the commands of the Lord. Early in the morning, he set up an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He designated some young men among the Israelites, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls as offerings of well-being to the Lord. Moses took one part of the blood and put it in basins, and the other part of the blood he dashed against the altar. Then he took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people. And they said, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will faithfully do." Moses took the blood and dashed it on the people and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord now makes with you concerning all these commands." Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel ascended, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet there was the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. Yet he did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the teachings and commandments which I have inscribed to instruct them." So Moses and his attendant Joshua arose, and Moses ascended the mountain of God. To the elders he had said, "Wait here for us until we return to you. You have Aaron and Hur with you. Let anyone who has a legal matter approach them." When Moses had ascended the mountain, the cloud covered the mountain. The presence of the Lord abode on Mount Sinai, and the cloud hid it for 6 days. On the 7th day, he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. Now the presence of the Lord appeared in the sight of the Israelites as a consuming fire on the top of the mountain. Moses went inside the cloud and ascended the mountain. And Moses remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights.
So how does this episode differ from the first revelation on Mount Sinai when Moses?
Well, he's got 72 witnesses. And there's a physical manifestation. I mean, the pavement of sapphire, and the people can see the presence of the Lord in the fire on top of the mountain. So this is it's much more manifest, this encounter with the Lord. It's much more tangible in that there's a cloud, and that there's fire, and there's a pavement of sapphire. So we can sense it. And I say that clumsily too, whatever sensing the Lord means. But the presence is very much there, and in a very different way, and there are a whole lot more selected, invited people on the mountain. The 70 elders plus the 4 of them. It's way different.
Oh,
I'm just looking at the footnote where it says, my monitor, who clearly is uncomfortable with this.
yeah.
Says,
Can't be a miracle.
Well,
seeing God means intellectual perception. They didn't actually see it.
Well, especially since we know the Moses wasn't allowed to see God face to face. So
Right.
how are they able to see God face to face in this moment if Moses was not?
Yeah.
Well, what did they see? It's hard to.
So, did they see the altar? They had to have seen the altar because the blood gets dashed against it and against the people. So they saw the altar at the foot of the mountain. The 70 elders plus 4 ascend the mountain, but I don't think they go all the way up.
But it's interesting because on one hand, it's more a more grand experience because you see them seeing God. On the other hand, you don't get the feeling of all the people at the base of the mountain, waiting, and the mountain is smoking, and the shofar is blowing, and the intensity of that whole experience. So in some ways, it's a more intimate kind of meeting with God. It's just the 70 elders. They go up, and they eat and they drink, and Moses then goes up and spends his 40 days and 40 nights there. But
It's almost as if they're sending him off.
they're
of
sending
the
him
mountain.
off.
Yeah.
And they're allowed to get a little taste of what he
Yeah.
gets. Like they get a little. What do you make of the eating and Yet he did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They beheld God and they ate and drank.
We came to eating and drinking before, didn't we? Where it seemed to be some sort of not a sin necessarily, but some way of behaving in front of God that wasn't so good.
I mean, Moses famously doesn't, as the commentators will look at this later. He doesn't eat, but he doesn't eat for those 40 days and 40 nights, but they eat. It makes him feel a little bit more human in some ways than Moses does.
Well, nice that God set a table.
God set a table, right? Yeah.
On a pavement of sapphire.
Yeah.
What is that pavement of sapphire? How do you understand it?
Maybe it's heaven reversed. Maybe it's, the sapphires come from the ground, right? But they're blue. They're blue like the sky, blue like a clear sea, blue like a tropical sea. I think it's heaven just reversed underneath it.
Beautiful. Some of the, well, hopefully we'll get to it. Some of the commentators say, well, the Israelites, what they knew was bricks. So they imagined that as a pavement because that's what they knew, but they were seeing something that was beyond imagination. They were just trying to explain it in a way that made sense to them.
It seems to me that it's not only anthropomorphic as we use that word. It's so stunningly so that I gather from the notes in the Har Zion that it was already being explained away or changed to something else by the rabbis in the Talmud. But Alter points out that in Onkelos, which is, I understand, the standard Aramaic translation or gloss on it, which is traditionally included in the Chumash, along with the Torah, along with the Hebrew text, that it says in verse 11, I think it's verse 11,
Verse
that
10.
No, that's the first one, and then in verse 11, yeah, that's where it says they saw, but then in verse 11, I don't know how it's translated in the they beheld. That's the same. They beheld the God of Israel, v'yechazu. So that's an eye thing usually, right? That's a vision, like chazon. It's a sight
Vision.
experience, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that in Onkelos, which is already, I mean, that's earlier than the Talmud, right? Or am I wrong about that?
Onkelos is earlier than the Talmud.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it says Onkelos is here. Alter translates the Onkelos. They saw that their sacrifices that had been accepted favorably, as though they had eaten and drunk, which is so interesting that it's already a kind of problem.
A very liberal translation of the text.
Yeah, that's why I called it a gloss. Yeah.
Well, even before verse 10, Onkelos translates, and they
Right.
saw the God of Israel. He says they saw the glory of the God of Israel.
Oh, I don't
very
have
different.
that. I see.
Very different than they saw the God of Israel.
Yeah.
They saw the glory of the God of Israel.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah.
Maimonides spends a lot of time in the Guide for the Perplexed talking about Onkelos and talking about how Onkelos absolutely in his translation tried to get away from anything that would concretize or materialize the divine. That's Maimonides' sort of praise of Onkelos.
Well, Onkelos is coming at a time when Greek culture is pervasive. And so the philosophic tradition, of the Greeks also was not into at this time anthropomorphic. Philo too is also not a big fan. But what the traditional commentators have to deal with is how do you understand this in terms of the previous revelation when Moses goes up the mountain? Is this the same one or is this a different one? And we just read all the people say we will faithfully do. Then we just have that, 4 chapters ago in the Torah. So how did you work all of it in? So Rashi says none of it's not. Rashi says it's not. The Torah is not chronological. And this actually happened before the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments happens at the end of this. And so all the commentaries have really complex ways of trying to juggle this. But you could say, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Could I make a point, particularly about what you just said about saying that it came before? And I think that's actually, I think Rashi saying that is correct in terms of the language of the grammar, as I understand it anyhow. Because it says we have Moses before we have Moses, the subject Moses before the verb and the simple past tense verb, and that's taken generally, I think, to mean that it's like a pluperfect. This had happened before, and I think that's
which
in verse.
verse are you referring to? Which verse are you referring to?
It's in. Okay, right. Go to chapter 24, verse 1. The Moshe Amar. It doesn't say V'yidaber Moshe or Vayomer Moshe. Moses had said all these words. Now that's the way. So Rashi's understanding of that is like some of the modern scholars who understand that I'm calling it a pluperfect. Had seen, they had done this, he had said this. And you see that all over. Not all the modern translators translate it that way. And I see that the new JPS, the one in Eitz Chaim, doesn't do it that way. But it does give you a different picture of it. I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Well,
it goes on that way too in verse 15. Yeah.
Rashi believes that way, but it's not important. But then even Ezra and Ramban and others, they don't like looking at it that way. So they see this as an event that happens afterwards. Because if you start to see the Torah is not in chronological order, you start to say, okay, well, how can you figure out what's the order of all the events? And so it all becomes too complicated.
It's loosely chronological.
Loosely chronological. Go ahead.
No, the difficult moments, the seeming maybe mistakes or discontinuities, once read as a general principle, but in the very conservative Christian world, always the attempt to explain them away, to harmonize them, where in the more traditional Jewish approach is to say they're intentional and meaningful.
Right.
You know, there's something purposeful about them. And so, you know, in both cases, there's a sense of trying too hard, but I do think the traditional Jewish approach is much more interesting and fertile, that there's something more to chew on.
Beautiful. It's interesting because they want to harmonize it, but they're willing to use very creative tools to harmonize it by saying it's not in order, or it's there exactly, which isn't as simple as saying it's all literal and just take it and make it work, you know, whatever way you can. But they're
but encounters with the divine are mystical and spiritual, and of course they're not going to be chronological, and of course you're not going to remember them in a chronological or in a typical type of way. So I can get with Maimonides on this. Yeah, it looks like a miracle, trying to rationalize this very spiritual encounter in a way that human rationality can understand, but this has got to be a leap of faith. I'm sorry.
Well,
You either accept it or you don't.
I mean, does it feel as supernatural to you as the plagues? As the plagues? Because it's about them seeing rather than something changing the order. It does.
Very supernatural. This is terrifying and glorious, and I mean, there's fire, there's smoke, there's blood, there are people on a mountain with people down
below. Consuming fire on top of the mountain. God is in the fire. And Moses goes inside.
Yeah.
So how does it change the view of God? Because I guess up until now we haven't had anybody. This is the first view of God essentially in the Torah. We have Abraham has a vision in which he's terrified of God, and he kind of goes into some blackout, and then God talks to him and he has a vision, and he hears of the slavery in Egypt happening. We do have Jacob wrestling with some kind of being.
That's a dream.
But this is a different magnitude. We're not sure if that's a dream. That's could be, but this is something of a different magnitude. Why pick this? Taking our traditional hat off and being a biblical scholar for a second, why would you pick this one to be at the end of this and the other revelation to be the main one? You could have switched the narrative and had, how would it feel different if you'd had if this was the main narrative, the 10 Commandments? You know, 10 Commandments come right after this, as opposed to the one of all the people at the base of the mountain. Because this one doesn't get anywhere near as much publicity, so to speak, right? This one, you don't read this at any holiday. Most people are not aware of this one, probably. It's tucked at the end of the Parsha.
And the other one, which, right, that was the one we read last week.
Yes.
You know, we always talk about the Israelites standing under the mountain. So it's like they're being threatened. You will do this or else.
Right.
You know, if you don't, you know, follow me, we're going to drop this mountain on you.
Beautiful.
Whereas this one, it has the feeling, I think, of being voluntary. You know, they said, without being coerced, you know, we will do what God wants. And we'll wait for Moses when he goes up the mountain.
Beautiful. But the other one's more theological in some ways. God comes and he makes this whole question, will you be this? Will you be that? And they say yes. And there's all this language that Phil was talking about last week of, you know, old ancient kings and their vassals coming. And so the framework was a lot more sophisticated. Here, does this feel more real? Or does the other one feel more real?
This one is more real.
Feels more real.
Yeah,
right?
because there's more audience participation. And it's longer. It's also a longer description.
It's more messy. It feels more like life itself in some kind of way.
But there was something that confused me about the end of Yitro, which was about, I think it was before
the
Ten
altar,
Commandments.
the altar piece.
No, not the altar being of hewn stones, but where he says, I will make you will be for me a people of a holy people and
a kingdom of priests.
a kingdom of priests. And I've been thinking about that all week. What did he mean by a kingdom of priests? Because he just drops, the compilers of the text drop that little tidbit in there and then move on. And now we've got 70 elders, and we've got 2 priests, and we've got an altar and an actual sacrifice and blood. There's actual blood in this sacrifice. And I'm not sure we've seen blood before. I mean, we see it later, but this is
the first real sacrifice.
Right. So is this what the priests are supposed to be doing? Is it a separate?
It's almost as if God, like the sacrifice, God responds to the sacrifice. It's like invoking God. He sprinkled the blood.
And then all this.
And he sprinkles it on the people, right? He dashes. How do you imagine that? There's a million people and he's
which means some people don't get touched with the blood. There can't be enough blood to cover, to splatter on every.
Who's the lucky ones, right? Who are the lucky ones?
When we first read that, my reaction was, you know, if I wasn't expecting it and I was in the front row, you know, would I go, oh, that's great, or would I go, you know what, Moses, what are you doing to me?
What about the ones that way, way, way in the back at the edge? Are they gonna be touched by the splattering of blood? I don't know.
Well, this is it's very ancient cross-cultural thing. I mean, when I lived in Nepal, I probably shared this before, but there was one day of the year where everybody did an animal sacrifice in the whole country. It was a day where people got to eat meat, which was a good part, but even people who were middle class would go to the temples and sacrifice an animal and then take the blood and dash it over their walls, their motorcycle, it was like a whole thing to dash the blood. And it was somehow it was bringing blessing, literally like a physical blessing. And we used to stay indoors on that. But literally you would walk out the next day and walk by the temples, and there'd be a thick layer of coagulated blood on the steps of all the temples going all the way down. That's how many sacrifices were made. I mean, but it served, from a sociological point of view, it served a purpose, because a lot of people couldn't afford meat every day. But this was one day, at least, where you knew everyone would get to eat meat. But there's something about the blood, because what we say, the spirit is in the blood, which is why we don't eat it. So the life is in the blood. So you're sprinkling the blood. There's something metaphysical going on there too. So all these sacrifices are being made, and then the elders are going up. Anybody else? How does this whole passage strike you? More real, less real, more powerful? I mean, the vision seems like something that wasn't. There's something tangible, almost real about it, because of its, however it was perceived. Not getting into details. Is it real? Is it in the mind? Is it not in the mind? What does that even mean? Where's the fine line between seeing something in your mind and seeing something real? That's a fine. Show me the line between physical reality and spiritual reality. But if you have a vision of some, I mean, I once read a commentary that, what's the difference between real life and a vision? That people who have visions will say that the vision appears more real than real life. So you tell me what's more real, what's more real. What is it? If you have a vision of something, does that mean it manifests in the physical? Or if it manifests in your mind, you might see it even more than you would see something in the physical. And so, I mean, in our tradition, I'm trying to think, when do we have people who said they had visions? In the mystical tradition and the Zohar, the Hasidim speak about visions to some degree, but it's not like, I guess in the Catholic tradition, they have all the visions of, the Virgin Mary, of, Bernadette and Lourdes and all of that. Indians have a lot of visions.
Peyote visions.
Peyote visions. I was thinking the other Indians, but
the thought that I have is, so when we talked a few weeks ago about God revealing himself, first he was El Shaddai and now he's Adonai, or Yod He Vav He. And so, and when he brought the Israelites out of Egypt, he was the pillar of fire, but he was still at a distance. And the thought that I have is, now he's taking a step further to reveal himself. And, it's kind of like somebody who lives in a big fancy house and they're like, hey, I'm going to invite you over, that sort of thing. I'm going to make it a little bit more personal. And of course, the people as a whole, they're still kind of outside the gate, so to speak. And the elders go up and they're kind of in the foyer. And then, Moses gets to go up and like be in the study, with God. I don't know. And that's kind of, kind of what I'm thinking. It's even a more, it's even a more powerful, like, I'm going to show you, who I am. Like, I'm going to make it a little bit more personal in a physical way. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what I was thinking.
I love that. There's a sense, right, of the plagues are already very distant. There's some God doing something, and then there's the Red Sea where God is doing this incredible miracle. And they come to the mountain and they hear God's voice speaking, and they encounter God in spirit. And here there's even a further where the elders themselves, those who are the leaders of the people who are Moses's judges and messengers, they go up and they get to actually behold the likeness of God. They get to behold something, some vision, however we want to describe it. And so after you've seen this, the people have really had a powerful encounter on every level. And then Moses spends another 40 days and 40 nights. And right, well, what happens to Moses when he comes back down? He is completely changed, right? He's completely a different person. And in some sense, the chronology of it, who cares, right? It's more about the story of this rapprochement between God and the Jewish people. And if we go back to the beginning of the book, right, the book is called Shmot in Hebrew, which means names. So the commentators say it's all about them getting to know the name of God. Well, here they really are coming to know God, in essence.
He's quite a God too.
So let's get. Go ahead, Phil.
Thank you. The eating and drinking, I think we might spend a moment on that, because it might sound to our ears as something kind of thrown in there in a way, but there's a really good note in the Eitz Chaim on that. It's verse 11, and they ate and drank, describing a formal part of the ceremony and concluding the covenant. I think that's a really good note, because it makes it clear there's been a ceremony, you make a deal, you have a covenant, you have a ceremony, and then you have a meal. If it's between humans beings, you have a meal, not just because it's nice to have something to eat afterwards, but because it's part of the ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And here the elders are taking part in that ritual. Now, there are people here better qualified than I am to talk about how the church fathers, I think, might have seen this, and I haven't read that, but I'm interested because it sounds to me it's very much like it's very evocative, I would think, in the church, that you would have this solemn ritual meal.
Well, but it's interesting because it says Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 of them ascended, and they perceived the sapphire stone, and then the next level is the nobles of Israel. So the nobles of Israel did, and he said he did not lay his and upon the nobles of the children of Israel. In my translation, it says he did not lay his hand. He did not lay his hand, and they perceived God, and they ate and drank. So this was a lower vision. This was not the higher vision that Moses and the other people had. This was a lower vision, and the eating and drinking is associated with a lower vision, I think.
I thought these were the elders. I thought these, I know they use a different word here, but I think those
is the Hebrew word the same? The nobles of the elders?
It's not, but it
Okay.
seems to be treated the same. I think maybe the rabbi could explain that.
Well, no, but Maimonides spent some time on this actually, and his sense is the eating and drinking was a lower thing. Okay.
It is. What he was saying is that he compares it, what a lot of the commentators do is compare it to Moses, who did not drink or eat. So it's saying you might think that because they're all bothered by the fact that Moses isn't allowed to see God face to face. So how are they able to see God face to face? So they're saying, well, they ate and drank is a clue to us that their vision was lower than Moses, who didn't eat or drink for 40 days and 40 nights. Well, they had to eat or drink. But I think the simple meaning of the text may be similar to what's in the Eitz Chaim, which is that, we do this also at Jewish holidays, right? You have a meal, you have a service, and then you eat, and the eating is a ceremonial meal or a bris. But you have a circumcision, you have the ritual, and then the meal itself is a mitzvah. It's a commandment. So the meal itself is part of the whole ceremony, and it's also concluding. A bris is literally the covenant also, right? So you're concluding the ceremony with that. So I want to go back for a second to the beginning of chapter 24, and the fourth word is come up to the Lord, right? To ascend, the verb ale. Then you have in verse 9, then Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu ascended. Then in verse 12, you have the verb ascend again. The Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and wait there. And then in verse 15 again, you have the same verb, Vaya'al Moshe, and Moses ascended. So this whole chapter is really the word, it's about ascending, different levels of ascension and different experiences of ascension. And the language is very intentional in that regard, of ascending to have an experience, and of different levels. I think at different levels is very clearly set out, right? The children of Israel are not allowed to ascend with the elders. The elders ascend and have some kind of experience. And then Moses goes up, and he goes up for 40 days and 40 nights, and they can only perceive from below. So this theme of the holiness and how there's different, what are you able to, in your level of purity and your level of inner thing, able to experience yourself. But the experience is unmistakable, even to the Israelites. They see the fire that's going on up there. So they have they're able to partake on some level, but not completely. So let's get to our commentary. I have one more actually here.
Oh, okay. Do you need it or what? 'Cause
No,
I
I've got
have it here.
this one.
All right, because I have it.
Who could read for us Ibn Ezra? We're gonna just go through these.
I can read.
Thank you.
In the light of the very heaven for clearness. Its meaning is beneath the paved work of sapphire stone, there was the likeness of the very heaven. The latter refers to the ice-like firmament that was stretched over the heads of the beasts Ezekiel saw in his vision, Ezekiel 1:22. Now our verse reads, and they saw the God of Israel. However, in Ezekiel, scripture reads, this is a living creature that I saw under the God of Israel, Ezekiel 10:20. Scripture was being brief. The creature was under the firmament, and the firmament was under the throne of glory. All of this was under God the revered.
So let's actually go look up that verse from Ezekiel. We're going to go to Ezekiel 1, Ezekiel 1:20, Ezekiel 1:23, because it's really interesting that Ezekiel's vision has some parallel with this. And in our Chumashim, in our Tanakh,
Okay, Ezekiel, what are we looking?
Ezekiel 10.
Ezekiel 1:23. No, we're going to do Ezekiel 1:23.
So it's about page 900.
Page 893. Actually 94. We'll start a little bit later. Actually, let's do 22, verse 22, because it's the beginning of a chapter here. Page 894. Priscilla, do you have it?
Yeah.
Do you mind reading for us, verse 22? So this is the grandest vision probably of all the prophets, the beginning of Ezekiel's prophecy, the book of Ezekiel.
Above the heads of the creatures was a form, an expanse with an awe-inspiring gleam as a crystal was spread out above their heads. Keep going.
Sure.
Under the expanse, each had one pair of wings extended toward those of the others, and each had another pair covering its body. When they moved, I could hear the sound of their wings like the sound of mighty waters, like the sound of Shadiah. They tumbled like the din of an army. When they stood still, they would let their wings drop. From above the expanse over their heads came a sound. When they stood still, they would let their wings drop.
Let's do one more line.
Okay, above the expanse over their heads was a semblance of a throne in appearance like sapphire. And on top, upon the semblance of a throne, there was a semblance of a human form.
Okay, thanks. So we have again this appearance of sapphire in the vision. In Ezekiel.
Well, I think I saw something here about sapphires don't exist in this part of the world. It's probably lapis lazuli, which does exist in that part of the world, which is even bluer and even more of a spectacle to me. I'm just, it looks like these creatures are put in there to create levels of separation almost, or protection or veiling between us, us creatures of clay and the divine.
Well, there's again a sense of barriers, right? Of this
Yeah,
firmament of
barriers,
above,
yeah.
above, below, and above, and of the sapphire, the color, right? Even before there's this, again, this thing of the sky, and it's almost like describing
Deep,
different
deep, deep.
worlds, different this. It's a very, very vivid description of some kind of thing. So let's go more into our commentaries. Nancy, would you mind reading Rabbeinu Bachya? This has a lot of Hebrew, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll hang on you all for a minute. And they, Rabbeinu Bachya, and they saw the God of Israel, etc. The Torah refers to the attribute which we've discussed.
The attribute of glory, kavod, glory. Yeah.
Or kavod. Kavod is glory. Which we have discussed at length earlier, saying that according to Hesikta Zubrata, this is another name for what is popularly known as Shekhinah. Glory. Okay. We know that it is impossible to experience a vision of the attribute of Hashem, as Hashem told Moses specifically that his attribute of Hashem cannot be seen by any
Right.
living
This
human
is
being.
a-
Exodus 30.
This is, you cannot see my face. Yeah.
This is why Onkelos translates these words as.
This is Aramaic, and they saw the glory of the God of Israel. Yeah.
This is the same attribute, kavod, which the prophet Ezekiel experienced in a vision, Ezekiel 1:26, which we just read, as the appearance of a human being above the other chayot. First, he had seen
The holy chayot
okay,
and the Ophanim are the angels,
the angels. Okay,
a certain kind of angel,
beneath, next to.
the chayot.
Okay.
Again, who can, this is Ezekiel's vision. Who knows what he's seeing, right? These are all kinds of winds and chariots. Okay, go ahead.
When
The
he
chariots,
looked
yeah.
again, he saw the sky suspended above the heads of the chayot. Then he saw the throne of the Lord above the sky. Above that, he saw a likeness resembling that of a human being, still higher above the throne.
Okay, continue on.
Okay, according to Ibn Ezra, then the meaning of the whole verse is that these people saw the throne of God's glory as a structure made of sapphire-like brick of the utmost clarity and purity, and beneath this sapphire-based structure, they saw the pure and clear sky. This was the same as the sky seen by Ezekiel in his famous vision, which was above the heads of the chayot, described there as awesome ice. The sky mentioned here was also beneath the throne, and the throne beneath the God of Israel, just as in the vision of Ezekiel, except for that the Torah did not bother to write all these details in the verse. The idea that our verse was shorter and more concise is the opinion of Nachmanides, who states that above the Chaya is the sky, and above the heaven is the throne, and above the throne is the God of Israel. So there are layers, there are levels. And it's interesting because what I was feeling as we were talking about, the people gathering at the mountain and Moses taking the 70 up, it's like you have the mass of people. Then from there, Moses and the four of them take another 70 elders. They have, they eat and drink. Are they halfway up the mountain? They're a little bit up the mountain. They're kind of at the foot of the mountain. Then from there, Joshua comes out and waits for Moses, and Moses goes up even higher. So it's a pyramid, right? It starts out at the bottom with the people having the blood dashed all over them. Then the elders go up and have this ritual meal. Then Moses and Joshua come out, and then Moses goes all the way up. and spends 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain. It's like a constriction up. And then here reading this, it's the opposite,
The
right?
heavens
It's
are
like,
the same. The heavens are also going
yeah,
up there.
and it-
More and more life,
there's more and more and more.
more and more life and
Yeah.
creatures and
Yeah.
God and all this.
And each level is more mysterious and more powerful and more spiritual.
Difficult to
and holy.
understand and explain too, right? Trying to explain what he's seeing.
Yeah.
So do you mind reading the next one too? Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Picking up on what David had said earlier, you can see this hierarchy of visions or mystical insight by parallel to a hierarchy of cognition or of understanding, of forms of knowledge and so on, if you want to do it that way. So you have these different ways of looking at it. It's so striking that the text says beneath his feet, tachat raglav, right? And so you see God, and then it's so blinding, or at least maybe it doesn't kill you, but there it is. And then you go right down to the feet, and that's already too much. And then you look to the pavement and
And
see.
the pavement it feels endless almost the way it's described.
The way this structure is explained, this, by the way, is the central mystery of Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed. Okay, and the whole Guide for the Perplexed is to reveal this mystery, this particular mystery of Ezekiel's vision.
Yeah.
And the way he somehow explains that is over our heads, because we in fact are the creatures, over our heads, above our thinking, above our heads is some sort of rakia, some sort of firmament. Above the firmament is the sapphire stone or the feet. The sapphire stone is the same as the throne that Maimonides puts together the sapphire stone and the throne of God. So Phil, you're right. I mean, these are just levels above our head, metaphorically, and really levels above our head.
Yeah.
That somehow can be reached through ascending above our head, and you reach these particular things that you can feel. The Ezekiel's vision is interesting because it gives you a guide of maybe what to look for when you travel above your head.
And it's interesting because this is why Ezekiel's vision then becomes like the map for future for a whole, not all Jewish mysticism, but for a lot of Jewish mysticism, especially in the early years, rabbinic years, because they felt you can have a taste of that in your own mystical journey. That's what you were looking for, to try and recreate that, and all the mystery is locked into the significance of it. And so the rabbis are all responding to bringing Ezekiel into this, because this, with the sapphires, obviously they think this is the same vision. So if you're doing that, you're thinking, not only am I linking into Ezekiel's vision, but I'm linking into the vision of God after the 10 Commandments, which is also this is the pathway, the mystical pathway of the Jewish people, and gets all kinds of different association within Jewish mysticism. But let's continue on, because I have two other commentaries I really want to read, at least. Nancy, do you mind reading the next one?
Torah.
Yeah.
Torah.
Yeah.
The Hebrew translates, they experienced the vision of the God of Israel. Ibn Ezra explains that the word
Vayiru, and they saw.
Vayiru, they saw. Here describes a prophetic vision, not perception with their physical eyes. This vision would be similar to that seen by the prophet Ezekiel when he described the appearance of God's throne, which we just read, Ezekiel 26. He described it as made of
a stone of sapphire.
Okay. Whereas here, sapphire. Okay.
Sapphire, that's where sapphire comes from.
Yeah. Okay. Whereas here, the Israelites, due to their familiarity with bricks, describe it as
Livnat sapphire.
Okay, as a brick made of sapphire. In verse 28, that chapter in Ezekiel, the prophet spells out what he saw was not the actual throne, but a
Demut,
an image of such a throne. Nachmanides writes that according to the plain meaning of the text, these words,
the words of God of Israel,
mean that the merit of the patriarch Israel, was the catalyst that enabled them to be granted such a vision.
So let's move on. So let's move on to the next one, and then So Torah Roch, he's a late medieval commentator who always comments on Nachmanides. But here again, there you can see how they're all playing off each other. Even Ezra is the earliest one, and he's coming up with a comment. They're all building. But let's go to the Talmud itself, because I think this makes it a little bit more accessible for us.
Okay, Babylonian Talmud, Hulin 89a, the Gemara answers, as it is taught in a Baraita, that Rabbi Meir would say, what is different about sky blue from all the other colors such that it was specified for the mitzvah ritual fringes?
One of the fringes is supposed to be the chelik, the blue, yeah.
It is because sky blue dye is similar in its color to the sea, and the sea is similar to the sky, and the sky is similar to the sapphire stone, and the sapphire stone is similar to the throne of glory, as it is stated. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet the like of a paved work of sapphire stone, and the like of the very heaven of the clouds. Exodus 10. This verse shows that the heavens are similar to sapphire. And it is written, and above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne as the appearance of a sapphire stone. Ezekiel 126. Therefore, the throne is similar to the heavens. The color of the sky blue dye acts as an indication of the bond between the Jewish people and the divine.
So we see how he then sees a ritualize in the thread, in the tzitzit, the blue thread, that when you're looking at that thread, that's supposed to remind you of all these things. It's almost like a meditative tool to look at it, or like John's kippah. The blue in John's kippah has some of that blue too. Yeah. You're supposed to look at that, supposed to look at that blue in the tzitzit, and that's what's supposed to remind you of all these experiences, everything we're reading about. And so we may not have access to quite that level of vision, but when we meditate on that blue, or even look at the sky or look at the sea, we're getting a taste of that all those levels and of the experience of the throne of glory. So now we're going to get really, really mystical. And we're going to go to the next page, Share Ora. First case. This is a text I've never brought before. This is real Kabbalah. This is Gikatilia, who's one of the most important Kabbalists. So we're a little background. So the word for sapphire, right? Sapphire is very close to the word sephirot, right? The sephirot of Kabbalah, the divine qualities, right? I believe there's 10 divine qualities. And in the vision of Ezekiel, right, there's the Even, the stone of sapphire. Who would like to read this very Kabbalistic text? Shari Ora.
I can read it, Rabbi.
All right, thank you.
Shari Ora, first gate. And sometimes the name Adonai is called by the nickname Even, stone, because it is the basis, yesod, for all the buildings of the world, and all that is found in the world support themselves with it and need it. And it is called headstone, Zechariah 4:7, because from it came out all the multitudes from high and low during creation. And it is called sapphire stone. See Ezekiel 1:26, Ezekiel 10:1. Note linguistic connection with Sephirot, because it receives all the nuances from all the other levels above it and acts on the creatures both a thing and its opposite, sometimes for good and sometimes for bad, to make alive and to make die, and to make sick and to heal, to make poor and to make rich, and so on. And the hint of this, see now that I am the one, and there is no power alongside me. I make die and I make life. I separate it and I heal. Deuteronomy 32:39. Moreover, this aspect absorbs the strength of the Sephirot and draws to itself all types of emanation and blessing. And after it has drawn from the blessings above it, returns and gives sustenance and food to all found below it, to each as it is fitting. And regarding it, it is written, the stone that the builders rejected has become the head cornerstone. Psalms
No,
1.
let's actually stop. We're going to stop there because I do want to get to the very last comment. But we see how in Kabbalah, then they're saying that this vision of God, of the sapphire stone, of the blue, of the sea, it somehow is directly related to God in the absolute highest, the highest Sephirah, the Adonai, the God where all life flows from, and all blessing and all life and all death and everything flows from that blue, from that vision, from that place. So I want to hold on to that. This is the mystical side. Then we're going to try and pull it all together with the very last comment on page 5 of Sforno. Sforno is nowhere near as mystical, but this is one of my favorite comments I've read in a long time from a traditional commentator, because sometimes commentaries just go out of their way to really tie things together, and this is one beautiful example of it. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but I'd like to read it. So who wants to read this last one, page 5?
No one else is
Okay, Alan, go
stepping
ahead.
up. I'll read it. Each time Moses ascended the mountain from this point on, he remained on it for a period of 40 days and 40 nights. This period corresponds to the time it takes for a fertilized egg in a woman's womb to achieve a critical status that permits us to refer to it as a fetus. Moses' stay on the mountain for such periods of time affected his spiritual progress in a similar manner, elevating him to higher spiritual dimensions. The evidence lies in the fact that eventually Moses' face radiated so much spiritual illumination that the people were frightened by this phenomenon, and Moses had to veil his head. Moses had been meant to achieve this stature already at the end of his first 40-day stay on the mountain, but the people making the golden calf and worshiping it foiled this plan. God himself told Moses to descend due to his people having become corrupt. According to our tradition, Moses' second stay of 40 days on the mountain was a period when God's anger at the people had not yet abated, so that he could not be rewarded with the distinction God had in mind for him. He attained that distinction only during his third stay on the mountain, when he was also instructed concerning the construction of the tabernacle, seeing that he was told to place the second set of tablets in the Holy Ark. This did not refer to an ark within which to place the shattered first set of tablets. In fact, according to tradition, seeing that the letters written by God on the first set of tablets had flown away, the remnants of those tablets, which were eventually placed in another ark, are not referred to as the testimony, seeing they did not contain any writing anymore at that point. Connecting with 25:8, where God says to Moses that he will take up permanent residence in the tabernacle to be built, the first 2,500 years of mankind's history, where God was equally accessible anywhere, has come to an end. And there would be a centralized form of worship as part of the Jewish religion. Instead of God permitting the erection of altars anywhere it pleased man, and his coming to meet man at such sites, now the roles are reversed, and he will be in residence in his palace on earth. And anyone who wishes to pray to him effectively will have to do this at that temple. There will be groups of people charged with the sacrificial service in the temple, The priests and laymen will not be allowed into the inner sanctum of this temple at all.
So let's actually stop there. I have to run, but how I wanted to pull it together is by saying, what it's saying is that there was a profound change at this moment where suddenly they understood the fabric of the universe was changed and the God was now accessible from everywhere in the air in a certain section to in a tabernacle. And that this vision somehow was a way for people to then take that experience of this vision and act as a piece of it through the centralized worship in the tabernacle. What's interesting is maybe in our time, with all of this stuff opening up again, we're in a different period where once again, the temple is no longer external, but internal. We're able to have everything we've been talking about, the sapphire stone, the ledge, the holiness that Moses goes through as the leader. We all can have more of that taste within our own heart without having to go into the external to experience it if we all but try to do it in our own way. Thank you all for joining. I have to run.
I'll turn that off.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
See you next week.
Yeah.